know if we should keep that door open or closed to make it more inviting or less inviting. Yeah, and this panel is about the future of consumer crypto. I got asked to moderate this panel, which is a real privilege. I was chatting to these gentlemen up on stage, and when I realized who they are and what projects they're working on, I was super excited to learn from this discussion. So it's nice to moderate it and not have to think or be a part of it, but just enjoy the responses. Arjun, you were a late addition. Do you just maybe want to introduce yourself, and then we can get started? Everyone else has been introduced.
Sure. Hi, I'm Arjun. I'm one of the founders of Everclear, formerly known as Connext. Connext is a project that's been around in the space for a very long time. We were started in 2017 with the goal of basically making it possible to build actually usable applications on blockchains, which really is crazy, still sometimes not really possible. In the early days, we kind of focused on like L2 research and scalability. We built one of the first L2s on Ethereum in 2018. And then since then, in about 2020, we kind of saw this problem associated with interop and now chain abstraction. And so we pivoted into building one of the first intent-based bridges. Today, Everclear is a system that allows for other intent-based bridges to be able to coordinate with one another to settle liquidity most optimally between chains. We think that that's something that is like one of the biggest blockers to actually scaling out chain abstraction to thousands of like application-specific chains, like this whole ecosystem is sort of hedging on at the moment.
Amazing, thank you. And I think chain abstraction is something we're going to hear a lot of. What does it have to do with consumer crypto? I think we're about to find out. So while this is a pretty technically and product strong panel, we are all crypto consumers in the room in some way or another. So we'll kick things off by asking what are the largest barriers that's preventing consumer crypto from taking off like a wildfire? Arjun, you may have already have alluded to some of those problems. Why don't you start and kick us off?
I mean, it's really interesting because like in traditional and literally any other industry in the world, right? When you're talking about adoption, you're talking about like go-to-market, you're talking about user experience, and basically it's a lot of like UI level and like market level stuff. And those are things that are very easy to iterate on. Whereas something that I think was very surprising for this whole space was just how much of actually making this infrastructure usable for consumers was like an infrastructure problem that would take, almost a decade to solve. I think from my perspective, a big part of that, of where we are now, is that we finally, after so long, have the capacity to actually build scalable applications by like scaling out horizontally to many more chains. And like it feels like the like last thing that's remaining is abstracting away that experience, is like making it so as a user you don't have to do like, imagine if you're using YouTube today and you had to go and like figure out which server stack to connect to in order to go and use YouTube. Obviously no one would ever use YouTube. Instead you just go and like search for cat videos on youtube.com and you find cat videos. It's pretty fantastic, and I think crypto needs to make that jump, right? We need to go from I am a user that's connecting to Arbitrum because I like the Arbitrum ecosystem and I want to use apps on top of it, to I'm a user and I'm just using XYZ application. Doesn't matter how it's built, doesn't matter where it is.
I'd like to add two specific points. First is higher level with regulation. I've been a builder myself, so traditionally like Web 2 world, when you incorporate, you just do like a Delaware C Corp, but as soon as you start touching DeFi, like even the lawyers get scared. So having that guidance from a company infrastructure level is one thing, and then on another spectrum is user acquisition. So in a prior life, I did a lot of like paid ads, and one of the cool things was like once you found a really cool ad, you just added a zero to the budget, and then it would start scaling out. So with like Facebook ads, Google ads, the beauty of it was once you kind of cracked an ad that worked, you would aggregate more data, and then you would feed this data to the algorithms, and then they would find something called a lookalike audience. So like if you gave the database 1,000 customers, you give it to Facebook and say, find me 1 million people that are within similar parameters, whatever algorithm they are. And then you can really scale it out. Like this is a really effective user acquisition model. Like shout to the Web3 ad companies coming out trying to solve this, but like we'll get more data like on-chain activity and stuff. But yeah, so those are my 2 points, is regulation and then user acquisition.
I'll actually just chime in on the user acquisition part of things. So traditionally, how marketing has always been since like few decades now, we have this funnel which is more or less linear: awareness, acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, referral. I think when it comes to Web3 and actual user acquisition, when we're talking about front-end users there, it needs to be a circle. And the feedback needs to be at the very center of it, because within Web3, users come in and drop out at any part of that circle. And in the end, like if we have the center as like feedback and education, we can learn and we can keep the circle going.
I guess just to add to this, I guess 2 points to build off of what Arjun said specifically. We absolutely have made a ton of progress as an ecosystem. We've invested a ton over the past few years, of which I'm interested to hear Richard's take on this. But we've invested a lot of money into the ecosystem for a lot of infrastructure, and not a lot of apps have materialized from that. But I think the infrastructure's made a lot of progress, of course. Like scalability has been the number one thing. We're at a point in the ecosystem now where, in my opinion, I would consider building scalable experiences to be pretty accessible to people, whether it be through really performant generalized chains or through app chains, or it may be. The options are there, and they're good options, and they work depending upon the application that you're building. The issue is that as we move towards this ecosystem, as we moved away from the whole theory that we're going to have 1 or 2 or 3 chains that are going to dominate the landscape, to now having hundreds or thousands of blockchains, is that fragmentation at a user experience level has continued to proliferate, right? We have the necessity to know that you're connecting to Arbitrum, or know that you have balances here and you don't have balances there, I need a bridge over here and there. So these nuances are things that are fundamentally inaccessible to users because they deviate from what users are used to in Web 2. And so, as was mentioned, until Web 3 reaches that point at a user experience level where it's parallel to Web 2, we're going to have a lot of trouble getting consumers in. But I wouldn't say that this is actually the most important shift that's needed for consumer adoption. I think that really the main thing for consumer adoption is developers, in my opinion, aren't really incentivized to create consumer-facing experiences. And I talk about this a lot because I think that chain abstraction also tends to solve this problem, but I think that developers today are generally, they make the most revenue from building things that are incredibly speculative, or building things that are lazy and they replicate it across 5, 6 different chains and earn revenue from each deployment. And so generally, I think the Web3 market today does not reward true innovation. It creates an environment where the applications that are being built are not applications that I would necessarily consider in a large capacity to be consumer ready. You have some exceptions to it, of course, but I think in a whole we are not in a consumer facing environment. And further than that, I think generally applications don't tend to optimize for UX or for application quality or user centricity. And so I think that as we see things like chain abstraction emerge and the lines between chains blur, and most importantly users become a universal, a central source of mindshare, what's going to happen is that no longer does the underlying chain matter in terms of where I connect to as a user. And so as a market, the competition is with every application everywhere. There's no, like right now I use this example a lot, and I'm sure Arjun is tired of me saying this, but I think that if you think of it today, like my competition, if I'm building an application on, I don't know, Base, my competition is primarily applications on Base. It's not applications on Polygon or applications on Linea, because that is a different siloed part of the ecosystem, and so I'm not nearly as competitive for those applications. But when a user base is universalized, when there's no barriers there, my competition is actually the entire market, and so I need to optimize for quality and for more consumer-facing experiences. Otherwise, I can't compete in the market and I can't generate revenue. And so I think that chain abstraction will bring upon a deeper impact of how the market actually changes as a result of this kind of universalization of users that I hope will cultivate more consumer applications and those that tend to build revenue from building things as Web2 does.
Hopefully it leads to less like X for Y copy pastas, right?
Ponzi's.
Like Uniswap for XYZ,
Yeah.
Aave for...
This
yeah.
is a point I'd throw to Richard is like, going back to the points of incentives is once tokens get introduced, the Ponzi's really get a flywheel going. So you, from an investor POV, like, is it better to kind of delay the tokens, or kind of, how do you, from an investor standpoint?
I'll try and answer that in like a swoop through some of the points that you guys have made, which are, I mean, a great array of different points, and I think probably the key ones. But so picking up on this point about avoiding too many X for Ys, and therefore a situation where the kind of product management discipline is maybe a little bit lazy. I guess we're seeking that kind of deeper, broader user liquidity ultimately. So let's get away from TVL, get to, would it be TPL or TUL, or whatever the metric might be. And but before we kind of dig it further into that, I think if we go back and look at, who remembers GeoCities? And obviously, Friends United, GeoCities, MySpace, whatever. And then ultimately kind of Facebook, and then ultimately Facebook Mobile. That time period is sort of kind of at least a dozen years. And I think it's easy to forget how long it takes to build something that can really take off and dominate. And from a user experience perspective, and build a kind of very powerful platform. And it took some work on the infrastructure side, as well as a lot of kind of hard work on innovating and taking risks on the user side and what the proposition was. And I think in our space, there was a kind of in MySpace, there was a tendency to sort of think there was going to be a kind of shining light of kind of user experience glory, who's going to come around the corner and just bless this DApp with Web 2 types of shininess. But they kind of never happened. And then we almost had a phase where people rejoiced in how shitty the dApps were, which I think was linked to the curve or other things. Like, I think it was linked to the fact that it's very, if you can, humans will get distracted by the ability to make money quickly, or kind of just, sort of engage in their own kind of echo chamber of self-celebration. And so I think sort of, given that was easy, and we can all kind of grasp the kind of opportunity of the world casino a little bit more than the opportunity of the world computer, that's why I think, things were so bad from a UX perspective. But as covered now, I think the infrastructure changes are going to be made and have to be made to cope with the fragmentation that exists. That's going to force better discipline around the UX, and there will be no further excuses for kind of moving out of kind of trading or gambling as the key use case, which of course has been held up, as it was well put, by regulation as well. So one of the use cases that clearly could have taken off more with excellent UX has been hampered by the status quo. I do think that looking forward, the way we look at the kind of the space, we think finance is clearly a big set of use cases. Gaming and games and going fully on chain is something that we've seen some sort of growth in, and everything that's more coming in the future. But actually, the third bucket that we can have is all around the combination of AI and sovereignty, or self-sovereignty, and or crypto, whichever way you want to put it. And one way we think about that is that that the sovereign layer, the blockchain or whatever, is this incredibly powerful way to organize the world's information, identity, capital, social capital, and data from the bottom up. And why do we want to do that? We want to do it so we can present it to algorithms and do crazy cool things. But actually, the real power of that, and we were chatting briefly before, is going to lead actually to the destruction of the whole concept of an app in the first place. So we're going to shift from users saying, hey, there's an app for that, and going and selecting what you need to solve your current problem, to AI services just finding, through the expression of personal intents perhaps, the participant in the network they're building that needs what they have to offer, and then hopefully making them an owner as well, and thereby kind of destroying the whole notion of today's app stores and disrupting a lot of stuff. And we're going to need for all of the infrastructure to be able to operate sort of seamlessly, including abstraction, for that to have a chance of working effectively. But for us, that's the kind of the bigger picture.
I think, like, just to start, I think companies, if they want to be more end user friendly, they need to re-implement the user research as the first step. Build on that, segment their users, and depending on the users, it has to be a bit different onboarding for different types of apps as well. Like the more they can relate while they are onboarding, the more likely that they will like still stay with them like 30 days later, 60 days later. Like in the end, what matters is what value they're getting out of it, but also Web3 has had this stigma, and also one of the biggest problems, it's like it's not just the users, it's actually the user onboarding problem. It's just so many hoops to go through if you truly want to attract consumers.
I think I'll add to the product stack on Web 2, Web 3's, I would say like dimensions apart. So from a retention standpoint, like Web 2 world has really optimized with data traction happening within the platform. So there's software like Mixpanel or Amplitude that literally track everything that the user does on the platform and then creates user profiles and really focuses on like 14-day activity to 30-day retention. So I think that product stack is lacking in crypto. I think the focus is like activity in TVL, but not really focusing long tail with stickiness.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I want to actually build on a couple of these things, and I have a little bit of a contrarian take here that I'm very interested to hear people's opinions on. So Richard, you said something really interesting, which is every application that gets built is going to have to go through this like adoption lifecycle, right? Say for example, you build this like hypothetically maximally Web 2 like decentralized social network, right? Now you have to go and get adoption for it, and you're competing against a bunch of Web 2 social networks that have already gone and gotten adoption. So you're competing against Facebook and others. That's going to take a long time. You're going to have to find a unique angle to PMF in consumer tech that is in social networks that is completely separate from crypto, right? There might be some crypto mechanisms that allow you to find that angle, but finding PMF and then post PMF growing to the size of something like Facebook will take a decade at least. Here's the interesting contrarian take. My contrarian take is that it's actually not a very good time to build a consumer crypto application. If you have already built one, I think you're in a category of projects that is like much more likely to succeed. But if you're building a new one today, the reason that I think it's perhaps not a good time is that the amount of lead time it will take you to actually get a significant amount of adoption is likely greater than the amount of time it will take for the world to move towards a model where you're actually just not even using applications anymore. You're just saying on ChatGPT, help me trade XYZ, help me find the best restaurants in this community, help me go connect with XYZ people. And behind the scenes, ChatGPT is connecting to a decentralized social network or a DeFi protocol or something like that without ever having to go to an interface.
This reminds me of the saying, first-time founders really focus on product, second-time founders focus on distribution.
Yeah, and that's actually maybe my contrarian take here is that I think that consumer crypto is going to happen, but I think the way that it will likely happen is that you'll have existing large-scale companies that have already been doing this, by the way, folks like Reddit who have been trying to build on blockchains for like years, right? You'll have these large-scale existing social applications or other kinds of Web 2 applications finally being able to build things on top of blockchains for the first time and then roll that out to their existing distribution.
Yeah, can I build on that and try and connect it back to this token point that you made earlier that I did a good job of not answering. But I did mention ownership, and I think that you can link sort of ownership to distribution to great product. So if you take the Reddit example, also think of Grass, I think it is, other folks who are trying to, and there are a few people looking at this, obviously how to take user data, have it aggregated, and have it kind of negotiate the kind of value of that, and then give some ownership to the users that are participating. If we can do that, marry it to distribution, which could be, like, for example, through Reddit or other existing platforms, and then have a good product at the end of it, that could take off in a kind of closer sort of horizon than one that fits the kind of, say, the VC time scales, for example, or the kind of angel funding time scales, or what are the bootstrapping time scales. And I think for us, actually, it's interesting. I was just thinking that this whole kind of AI-driven service that kind of comes to you, that kind of may just sort of come and go as you kind of move through your life in kind of real time. That's, I guess, measured in minutes or kind of hours. But there's another concept that people have been talking a little bit related to your point about the challenge with disrupting the existing Web 2 social titans, which is that of kind of ephemeral sort of social apps, so that we maybe it's a kind of a feature, not a bug. That as we are kind of all sharing our social graph information using one protocol or another, that you may have these kind of cryptic or communities, that sort of spring up, and we interact, and it could be quite deep interaction, and then it sort of subsides again, but all in the context of preserving that data for next time. And so I think that could be married. So you could have an ownership of your data married to a platform you come in through, and then some sort of community that springs up, and there's an application around that you use. But we won't necessarily end up with something as kind of monolithic and a stovepipe as we've got at the moment with just, with Instagram, with Snapchat, whatever. So it'll change the nature, and through that back door, we might end up disrupting them, maybe.
I think so. I mean, it's just, again, it's like how like even for these larger Web2 companies, there's this big risk, right? How do you maintain a competitive advantage when like people can just create these like ad hoc social networks? It's kind of crazy.
I guess their biggest moat is just like the consumers they already have. And I'll just go back to that one consumer crypto app thing. I feel like consumer crypto app, the first consumer crypto app will be super successful. The one that is just a consumer app built on blockchain and chain abstracted. The moment we start talking about it as a consumer app rather than also like segmenting it as a blockchain or a segmented app, like that is the biggest problem. Like the first thing you said, Erjan, like when you go to YouTube, you don't care about it's built on AWS, Google Cloud or anything. The moment we reach that time, like for any app, any platform, I think that's where the true adoption will actually start.
To piggyback off that, I think Polymarket is probably an interesting position right now where they are getting some strong product market fit and users come on board. They just sign up with their email. Like there's abstraction that way, and then the only activity they really got to do is get USDC on board. But yeah, they're really just focusing on like, come on, tech stack doesn't necessarily matter.
Focus on the value. Users, you have your user research, you do your good marketing, provide the value, and if you're a bit lucky, then it will actually be successful.
I think this is the first panel that I've moderated where the panelists had no idea of the questions and they've answered all of them without needing to say much. I'm thoroughly enjoying this, by the way.
You're doing a really great job.
I didn't want to say it, but thank you. So, question for you guys. What future technologies that you guys want to share a little bit on do you think is going to play a fundamental role? So much has been covered. We had some old school user research here from Vishal, which I still think plays an important role. The idea of distribution. No one cares about your infra. What's going to be some of the tech that we're going to see emerging that's going to play a role in bursting this infrastructure bubble and getting consumer crypto on fire?
I have one take with DeFi. I think DeFi opens up a can of worms in the order flow with fees. So I really think, for example, whenever a user pays a fee on chain, it's going to be the norm that their fees earning them yield. And the reason for that is the yield or the transaction fee can be put into a vault, into some liquidity position that earns them yield, and this creates a flywheel of incentives like come to our platform, we do the back end work, and we'll earn you yield at the end of the day. Like it's actually possible. So imagine like if Stripe, every 0.3% fee that you pay, every business is operate at a profit, but a percentage of that is actually put into a DeFi protocol, and their transaction fees are actually earning them yield. So that's a long tail DeFi point I think is going to take off.
Sweet team, we're taking notes, right? Yes. Okay.
We're recording it.
Great.
I think I do agree, DeFi is going to be the one, but also the problem there is the terms called yield and other stuff within blockchain. So for true Web2 users or just users coming in, unless they're also educated on that in some way, no one's going to take a class. It's not been taught in universities, maybe at least not right now. But unless we can actually make all these terms as simple as possible as, okay, this is the interest you earn, or this is what you're going to get out of it, And once that is actually done, once we do have educated users, I'm not talking about them taking a degree in blockchain. I'm just talking about these terms need to be so simplified for a true adoption. But DeFi is the one.
Yeah, I mean, of course, like personally, I think that chain abstraction and related infrastructural trends are most important because I'm a little bit biased towards that as somebody who works at a chain abstraction infrastructure provider. But I want to actually ask a question to Richard and Arjun because we were having a conversation earlier and also on the panel where you guys mentioned AI and its role in eliminating like product-focused organizations and like changing the dynamic around how products are presented. I'm always personally, especially when it relates to Web3, I'm always personally a little bit skeptical around AI's impacts. I have yet to be sold on it, to be completely honest. But I think that the points you guys made regarding that dynamic and how it'll remove products, or I don't know the exact languages you use. This is quite interesting. Could you guys expand on that a little bit? I guess I want to understand a little better.
I mean, I'll start and you'll probably improve. I was going to say, you were saying like make sure that the Sweat folks are taking notes here and rolling into the product roadmap perhaps. But of course, what you should put is you put like some kind of advanced development kind of co-pilot that just inspects the video, picks up all the notes and on a kind of multimodal basis and just pumps out a new version of the product afterwards. And I think that, I mean, I know what the state of the art is. I've been seeing a lot of chat about Replit and there's others obviously coming down the pike. I saw a demonstration of something, there's a bit of a dev co-pilot this morning that stopped short of producing smart contracts automatically, but it has in its roadmap to both produce them and have other capabilities to auto audit them, etc. So I mean that is obviously a contentious area that at the very intersection of dev, co-pilots and crypto. But I think that is the direction it's going to go. And if you couple it with not the sort of prompt paradigm, but the kind of personal intent paradigm of how we're going to receive our AI services, that it's not just services, it's just that already exist. It's new ones that are created on your behalf or on an ongoing basis for you. I think that really upends the whole way we have to think about the ecosystem. But you're probably, I think it sounds like you're more skeptical about even more basic uses of AI. Are your kind of fine-tuned small language models going to be actually specifically better for anything or worthwhile? Is that your skepticism?
My skepticism usually, I don't know. I hear a lot of decentralized AI. We're gonna replace massive verticals with AI agents, and it's going to be like the new interface for all of the internet. I mean, I can understand where a lot of that comes from, but I don't know. I guess maybe I'm just not very good at following new technologies, and I'm stuck in the past. But I think that I get to be sold on that specifically, especially as it relates to how blockchain will specifically power AI. I think that section sometimes I tend to be a little bit more skeptical about. But I think the points you made are good, and the idea of just like an AI agent creating a product for you, and that's your interface. You just describe what you want, and it does it. I mean, it's an interesting idea. Yeah.
I mean, I guess an important question, and I actually have a couple of also pieces of infrastructure I think are other infrastructure that are interesting to talk about. But for AI specifically, like an important question to ask is, why do products exist? Right? In like our capitalist worldview currently, products exist because there is meaningful amount of effort required to provide some service, and then you need to find a way, and you sort of have to like, you have to run this matching problem where you have to figure out there's some set of users that have a problem that they're willing to pay for, and then you have to figure out how large that set of users is and how much they'd be willing to pay for it, and then you build some service or some product that then addresses that need. And this is sort of like the direction of control, right? A company is trying to discover a market need. But there are other ways for market needs to become apparent, right? A user can just say, I need this. Like we do that all the time. And like when we do that, we say, okay, well, I wonder if there's an app for this, or I wonder if there's some service for this. Or sometimes we just say, dang, I wish someone would build this. But they don't, because there would be meaningful amount of work to build a product for your very, very specific need in a very specific moment. With the combination of blockchain protocols that are basically democratizing access to the back end like means of production for most applications, for finance, for social, for et cetera, right? By democratizing access to the means of production, you're basically making it so that you no longer have monopolization, like full stack monopolization on an application or a product, right? With a combination of that and then the ability for an AI model to then compose a bunch of protocols, compose a bunch of backend infrastructure to service whatever hyper-specific, unique need you have. Now there's not a need to go to a UI. There's no need to build products. There's no need that the concept of PMF doesn't exist anymore because intrinsically the user is the market, right? Because the cost of taking a product to market is effectively zero. That is the hypothetical end state. Now, the open question right now is how long it takes us to get there. But there's very interesting
I
implications.
think it's the inevitable end state.
Inevitable end state, yeah.
I'll be the optimist.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's not optimistic. Maybe it's
Yeah.
dystopian.
Yeah. Well, it'll.
No,
Yeah.
it's
It's gonna be
Skynet.
interesting.
I'll add to with Neuralink and AI. It's going to be like your thoughts are going to be fabricated.
I mean,
Be careful what you think.
Yeah. Now, two other pieces of infrastructure I think are kind of important. So this is sort of like the end state, right? I'll be honest, I'm really concerned about that end state. I think it's both very good and very bad. I think it's very good because it kills monopolies, but it's potentially bad because it just leads to this like hyper marketization of everything. And it's unclear exactly what that means. Maybe that just it kills capitalism completely. You know, what's the point in building a company anymore? Everything is a public good. Maybe that's a good thing.
Glenn Vile.
Yeah.
Radical markets.
Exactly. Very, very radical markets. However, in the interim, I do think that there's a couple of other pieces of infrastructure that people are not really thinking about, other things that are dependencies that people are not thinking about. One is privacy. We have all collectively, conveniently forgotten about privacy, right? At the moment, we are sort of unfortunately on track to build the most intense panopticon the world has ever seen. Right? We're building a tool that allows authoritarian governments to control people in a way that we never have before, and it's kind of insane, right? We talk about things like, we talk about consumer crypto, we talk about building financial applications, we talk about building social networks. Do you want 100% of your social connections to be visible to every single person you know? That's kind of an insane world to live in. And I think that that's something that we're really not taking seriously enough.
I actually completely agree on that one. For example, in Sweden, you could just go in, search anyone's first name and last name. You would know the cars they own, the taxes they pay, the salaries they're getting for like
Jesus.
ages. It's absolutely insane there.
Jesus. The second one, and I think this is another one that I think is interesting that people, it's like we have these like predefined terms like rollups, right? And we've defined these terms and they've come up with, they have this like colloquial meaning, which is like, it's like a blockchain, but it's not exactly, right? But rollups are not actually chains, right? A rollup is just a chain emulator. It's a server that's running a POA block. It's a server that's running like Truffle, effectively. Or whatever, actually, what do people use these days? Anyway, I think that people are not thinking deeply enough about what that means. I think what it means is that you can take any server. It doesn't have to be organizing data in a chain-like format. It doesn't have to be doing anything. As long as it has a state machine, you can write proofs for it, and you can post those proofs to chain. And what this means is you can turn any Web 2 application that exists today into a rollup without having them run any infrastructure, without having them write any code. They just need to define their state machine and their database model. This is, in my opinion, something that is starting to be thought about by, like for example, Arbitrum Stylus and things like that kind of starts to unlock this, but we aren't doing enough to understand what it would take to just like migrate an existing Web 2 application. Just have them post proofs on chain, and all of a sudden they're going from being like, Reddit as this like private closed source application to Reddit, but now all of the actions you take on Reddit are publicly verifiable.
Yeah, I think with that, let me just see, how much time do we have left? Are we done? Nothing, okay. Well, thank you, Arjun, for bringing up security. I think with that last topic, we've covered everything imaginable from, consumer crypto and the infra side of things to make that possible. Thank you very much to the panel we've had today. You guys were phenomenal. Do we not even have chance for one question?
Sure, let's do.
Can we just see if there's one question? Is there a hand raised there in the back? Any questions?
I'll drop a comment.
Yeah, on the security or privacy decentralized side of things, is there any Web3 technology that you see that's exciting from your perspective?
For privacy?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. The question was, is there any technology on the like privacy side that is exciting that I know I'm curious to hear if anyone else has any other things. To be honest, like everybody's super scared on the privacy side, obviously because of Tornado Cash, and it's understandable, right? Like putting devs in jail for billing and stuff like that is it completely kills any innovation there. I don't know if folks here are aware of like privacy pools. It's like an alternative model to privacy where you have this concept of proof of innocence. So rather than having every person KYC, you can instead, if something happens, prove that your deposits into something like Tornado Cash were not part of like North Korea's deposits. I think that's a really interesting model. But basically, what I think the future of privacy in the space is going to look like is like breaking up this like dichotomy that exists today between you either have to KYC and like have a government like have backdoor access, or you have to have everything public. Like, and there has to be other options, right? We have math that now with zero knowledge that is like completely changes how we think about information. There are alternative options on the table now that have never existed.
I'd add too, at the cultural level, I think these chains, like, maybe this is a question for Ethan, like, at the opcode level, there's no privacy, so I don't know if like, there'll even be like a EIP or some level that, the chains we're so used to using can actually bring us that privacy. If not, then I see it as a problem that we're going uphill against. So yeah, I think if we were going to go privacy, we got to start from ground zero, which is not ideal.
I guess like privacy also raises more of a philosophical question. Would people actually give up the convenience to have more privacy? Like, is there a mass amount of people who would rather do that?
I mean, it's always a problem. I mean, generally speaking, when we look at investment opportunities, if you're relying on consumers to care about privacy a priori, then it's probably never going to fly, because people don't. They wait until there's a drama or a crisis, and then they worry about it. And then, of course, it has the other problem we just sort of mentioned, which is that if you think at least you're making it truly private, then the government gets upset, because then they can't access the information they want to have. And either you go to prison because you're a dev, or you go to prison because you haven't made it private, like Pavel, or it's tricky. And then even if you take like kind of, in a sense, it is a privacy issue, but it's a kind of selective information sharing use case, like you just touched on in terms of KYC. There are jurisdictions where you can share KYC information so that you only have to do it once, and most people would agree that would be cool. And ideally, you'd have some kind of trustless network that would share that information, so there's no third-party and corruptible humans involved. But from our experience, that may still come. But even in that situation, where it's kind of very precise use case, it's possible from a legislative perspective, and you've got some of the technology, getting adoption is really hard, maybe because of the former 2 points.
Thanks, Richard. I think we're gonna have to end there. Thank you. Thanks for that question in the back. Thanks for the panelists. It was a pleasure hosting you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.